Night settles gently over the mountains of Japan, the air carrying the fragrance of pine and damp earth. A crescent moon hangs low, silver light spilling across quiet valleys where rivers wind like ribbons of glass. Crickets sing in the grass, their chorus steady and soft, and the occasional rustle of leaves reminds you that the world never truly sleeps. You breathe in, slow and steady, and feel the coolness of night air filling your chest. In this stillness, time begins to blur, and the boundary between now and then softens like mist on water. Far in the distance, the faint sound of a temple bell drifts through the air, its low resonance rolling across the hills. It is a sound that has been heard for centuries, a voice of bronze calling to travelers, warriors, and dreamers alike. As the echo fades, another sound rises in its place, the hush of memory, the whispers of history that still linger in this land. Somewhere in that hush is the presence of a woman whose story has never quite faded, though it has been carried for centuries in fragments, in poems and chronicles, in the imaginations of those who wonder what it means to stand alone and unyielding in an age of turmoil. Her name is Tomoe Gozen. For a moment, linger in this quiet night. Picture the faint glow of lanterns in a distant village, smoke curling from a thatched roof, the scent of wood fire mingling with the cool mountain breeze. Imagine yourself walking along a narrow path lined with tall grass, the soil soft beneath your feet, the stars scattered above like shards of glass across black silk. Each step feels light, unhurried, guided only by curiosity. You do not rush. The story waits patiently, just as the earth has waited to be remembered. As you walk, you notice the shadows of pines swaying against the moonlit ground, their shapes bending gracefully in the wind. The world feels both vast and intimate, and in this delicate balance you begin to sense her presence not in body, but in spirit, the spirit of a warrior who once moved across this same land, bow in hand, sword at her side. You imagine her footsteps on a similar path centuries ago, steady, sure, carrying the weight of duty and the fire of courage. Tomoe Gozen lived in a time of upheaval, the late 12th century, when the Genpei War tore across Japan. Two clans, the Minamoto and the Taira, fought for supremacy. Their banners unfurled on battlefields where the clash of steel met the cries of men. Yet within this world of warriors, Tomoe's name shines with rare brilliance. She was not an observer, not a figure on the margins. She rode at the front, clad in armor, skilled in the bow and the blade, commanding respect in a time when women were seldom given such honor. Chronicles remember her as strong, beautiful, and fearless, a warrior whose presence alone could rally allies and strike unease into enemies. But for now, do not leap ahead into battle. Stay in this quiet night, at the threshold of her story. Let the land itself prepare you. Hear the gentle rush of a river nearby, its waters gliding smoothly over stones polished by centuries. Picture the moonlight glimmering across the ripples, the soft silver dance of water and light. Somewhere on such a night, Tomoe herself may once have rested, listening to the same sounds, gazing at the same stars. The world she knew was harsher, more uncertain, but the night sky would have been the same, eternal, patient, watching. Close your eyes and imagine the rustle of fabric as she tightened the cords of her armor, the whisper of a bowstring as she checked its tension, the steady breath she drew before battle. Yet she was more than steel and skill. She was a presence, a force that defied expectations, a reminder that courage is not confined to one shape, one role, or one path. Her story is not only of war, but of determination, of choice, of what it means to live fiercely, even when the world seeks to confine you. The night deepens, and in its embrace curiosity grows. Who was Tomoe truly? How did she rise to fight alongside men in an age when women's voices were often silenced? What moments shaped her? What choices guided her? What legacy did she leave? These questions wait for us, resting gently in the folds of history, ready to be unraveled. For now, let the calm guide you further inward. The world around you grows softer, quieter, as though inviting you to step across centuries into the life of a warrior whose story still glimmers like moonlight on water. And as you take that step, you feel the promise of a tale unfolding, of battles fought, of loyalty tested, of a woman remembered not for silence but for strength. The land holds her memory, and tonight, so will we. The year is 1181. Japan is a land torn between two powerful clans, the Minamoto and the Taira. Smoke rises from wooden fortresses, rice fields lie trampled beneath marching boots, and rivers run red with the struggle for supremacy. In this chaos, one figure emerges who does not fit the expectations of her age. She is Tomoe Gozen, a woman warrior, trained in the bow and the blade, a rider as fearless as any man, and destined to carve her name into history. Tomoe was not born into the life of a warrior by chance. Her father served the Minamoto clan, and from the time she was young she absorbed the rhythm of war. While other girls learned to sew or recite poetry, she drew back the bowstring until her arms ached, striking targets with precision that astonished even seasoned men. She learned to control a war horse, not with gentle carriage rides, but with the thundering charge of battle. She did not merely follow tradition, she defied it. The world around her was shifting. The Genpei War had erupted, a 5-year struggle for the soul of Japan. The Minamoto and the Taira clashed like thunderclouds, each seeking to seize the imperial court, each claiming the right to shape the future. In the eyes of the samurai, war was not only about victory, it was about honor, duty, and the acceptance of death as a companion. For Tomoe, this was no abstract ideal. It became the measure of her very existence. Even among the Minamoto, she stood apart. Sources would later call her a warrior worth 1,000, a woman who rode at the head of armies, her long hair streaming beneath her helmet, her bow raised high. It was said she was as skilled with the sword as she was with the bow, and that few dared to challenge her directly. But legends do not spring from nowhere. They are forged in fire, in the moment when ordinary flesh meets extraordinary circumstance. One of her earliest appearances came during the brutal campaigns against the Taira. When Minamoto no Yoshinaka, her lord and sometime companion, rode to war, Tomoe rode with him. She was not kept in the shadows, she was placed at the front, a general leading soldiers who looked to her not with doubt, but with awe. In an age when women were expected to remain behind screens, she shattered that screen with the edge of her blade. Pause and imagine the scene. The dawn mist clinging to the valleys, war banners snapping in the wind, and at the heart of it, a woman in armor, bow drawn, eyes fixed on the horizon. She did not march for glory alone. She fought for survival, for loyalty, and perhaps too for the right to define her own destiny in a world that offered women little choice. But who truly was Tomoe Gozen? Was she merely a figure of myth, a name embroidered by storytellers? Or was she flesh and blood, a woman who fought and killed, who inspired and terrified, who stood at the edge of Japan's most decisive conflict? To answer this, we must follow her through the chaos of the Genpei War, the ambushes, the betrayals, the triumphs, and the devastating fall. And as we do, one question lingers. How did a woman rise to command in a world that gave no place to women of war? The Genpei War was not simply a clash of blades. It was a storm of shifting loyalties, court intrigues, and desperate gambits. At its center rose Minamoto no Yoshinaka, the man Tomoe served with unwavering loyalty. Yoshinaka was a cousin of the Minamoto leader Yoritomo, but unlike the calculating strategist Yoritomo, Yoshinaka was impetuous, driven by both ambition and fire. He sought not merely to fight for his clan, but to take control of it, to rise above his cousins and claim his own path to power. Tomoe was more than a follower in his story. She became his shield, his sword, and, in the eyes of many, his equal in battle. Chronicles tell us that when Yoshinaka gathered troops to march against the Taira, Tomoe stood at his side, not in silence, but with command. She gave orders, led cavalry, and struck fear into the hearts of men who had never imagined being opposed by a woman. Her presence was more than symbolic. She won victories. She led charges where arrows fell like rain and blades clashed in the mud. Soldiers who might have doubted her at first came to respect her in the only language warriors know: survival. If Tomoe commanded, men followed because under her banner they had a chance to return home alive. The Taira clan, once dominant, began to falter. Their fleets ruled the seas, but on land the Minamoto pressed them hard. Castles fell, strongholds burned, and through it all stories spread like wildfire. tales of a woman who fought like a demon, who could split a man with one strike, who rode through chaos as if the storm itself bent around her. But behind the victories, shadows gathered. Yoshinaka's hunger for power was no secret. As his successes grew, so too did his ambition. He did not fight merely for the Minamoto cause. He fought to place himself at its head. And with each step forward, he drew closer to a dangerous crossroads, one that would pit him against his own kin. For Tomoe, this was not merely politics. It was survival. Her loyalty bound her to Yoshinaka, but his choices would determine whether that loyalty led her to glory or to ruin. And in this moment, the question lingered. When ambition runs hotter than loyalty, who truly commands fate? The leader or the one willing to die for him? Kyoto in the late 12th century was a city of contrasts. By day, its grand palaces shimmered with gold leaf, their gardens arranged with such precision that every stone and ripple of sand seemed placed by the hand of heaven itself. By night, the glow of paper lanterns revealed narrow alleys where whispers carried more weight than swords. In 1183, those whispers spoke of a new master, Minamoto no Yoshinaka. When Yoshinaka rode into the capital, it should have been a moment of triumph. The Taira, who had ruled Kyoto with an iron grip, had fled before his advance. Aristocrats who had cowered under Taira dominance should have welcomed him as a liberator. Yet the cheers that greeted him were thin, laced with unease. For Yoshinaka did not enter as a humble servant of the Minamoto cause. He entered as though the city were his prize. His soldiers, rough men hardened by years of battle, looked upon Kyoto not as the sacred heart of the empire, but as spoils of war. They drank from temple chalices. They trampled through manicured gardens in mud-soaked boots. They laughed too loudly in the shadow of courtly silence. Tomoe Gozen rode among them, and though her presence commanded respect, even she could not soften the edges of their behavior. She had lived her life among warriors, but she was not blind to how their actions poisoned the fragile web of alliances that held the city together. In her heart, she must have known what the courtiers whispered behind lacquered screens, that Yoshinaka was not a savior but a storm. Inside the imperial palace, Yoshinaka's ambition revealed itself in full. He claimed victory not for the Minamoto leader Yoritomo, but for himself. He pressed the court to appoint him shogun, supreme commander of all Japan. For the aristocrats, who prized subtlety and tradition, his blunt demands were shocking, even insulting. And in the candle-lit corridors of Kyoto, resentment began to gather like smoke. Tomoe saw it in the eyes of the courtiers, fear wrapped in silk. They avoided Yoshinaka, but when their gazes fell upon her, their expressions shifted. Or perhaps, curiosity certainly. But beneath it, something darker. Unease. A woman in armor was a contradiction to their world, where noble ladies were meant to compose poetry, not sever heads. To them, Tomoe was an omen. To Yoshinaka's men, she was a shield. To Yoshinaka himself, she was indispensable. And yet, loyalty could not mend what ambition had already broken. Letters began to slip out of Kyoto, carried by swift riders to the east. Those letters bore accusations. Yoshinaka was unruly, dangerous, dishonorable. They reached Yoritomo, leader of the Minamoto, who had once tolerated his cousin's rise. Now reading of his arrogance and excess, Yoritomo resolved to end him. Orders spread like ripples in a pond. Yoshitsune and Noriori, Yoritomo's brothers, gathered their armies. They would march not against the Taira, but against their own blood. Tomoe Gozen must have felt the weight of this betrayal, like a stone pressing on her chest. To fight the Taira was expected. They were the enemy. But to face the Minamoto, to raise her blade against those who shared Yoshinaka's name, was something darker. It meant the Genpei War had become more than a struggle between two clans. It had become a struggle within the clan itself, a fracture that could not be healed. On cold nights, as frost crept across the city's eaves, perhaps Tomoe wondered at the path she had chosen. She could have lived quietly as most women did, away from the blood and fire of war. Instead, she stood at the center of it, bound to a man whose hunger for power now drew the wrath of his own kin. And yet, she did not turn away. Whatever doubts gnawed at her heart, they never reached her eyes. She remained Yoshinaka's constant, his warrior, his general, his shadow. By the winter of 1184, Kyoto had become a trap. Yoshinaka realized he could not hold the city. Supplies dwindled, allies abandoned him, and the courtiers, once timid, grew bold in their contempt. The writing was clear upon the walls. He was no longer master of Kyoto, but an intruder. So he chose to march north, back toward the provinces, where his power had first taken root. He would gather what strength remained and face his cousins in open battle. His path would lead to a place called Awazu, where snow lay thick on the fields and destiny waited with an unsheathed blade. For Tomoe Gozen, it was another march into uncertainty. But if she feared what lay ahead, she did not speak it. She saddled her horse, tightened her armor, and prepared to ride at Yoshinaka's side. The betrayal had been cast. The enemy was no longer faceless, and for Tomoe, the only way forward was through the storm. The retreat from Kyoto was no march of glory. It was a slow bleeding away of hope. Snow had begun to fall, blanketing the rice fields and cypress groves in a stark white silence. The cold bit deep into armor joints, numbing fingers, cracking lips. Horses, once proud and restless, trudged with lowered heads, steam rising from their nostrils in heavy clouds. The once mighty force that Yoshinaka had led into the capital now stumbled along broken roads, reduced to a shadow of its former self. Desertions came first in whispers. A man gone missing from the firelight one night, another who slipped away before dawn, leaving only a discarded spear behind. By the second week, the absences grew bolder. Groups of 3, 5, even 10 slipping away into the forested hills, convinced their fate would be better in surrender than in loyalty. Tomoe Gozen rode among the stragglers, her presence alone restraining the collapse from turning into a rout. She kept her helmet polished, her arrows sharp, her posture unyielding. Men who might have abandoned their posts at the sight of Yoshinaka's weary face thought twice when Tomoe's dark gaze swept across them. If she, a woman, could still hold her ground in this chaos, what excuse did they have to falter? Yet Tomoe was not blind. She could see the cracks deepening. She could hear the mutters when Yoshinaka was out of earshot, words of doubt, words of anger. They called him reckless. They said he had thrown away the favor of Yoritomo, that he had wasted the gift of Kyoto, that his pride had dragged them all into the pit. Tomoe knew there was truth in those whispers, but she also knew the samurai's path. A warrior does not abandon her lord when the shadows grow long. Loyalty is not tested in the feast hall, but in the snow, in hunger, in despair. At night, the campfires burned low, their flames sputtering in the icy wind. Men huddled beneath straw mats, shivering, their bellies empty. The silence of exhaustion lay heavy over the camp, broken only by the distant howl of wolves. Tomoe kept watch, her hand never far from her sword. She knew that in war, death came not only from the enemy's arrows, but from within, a knife in the dark, a mutiny born of fear. Yoshinaka himself bore the look of a man pursued not only by enemies, but by fate. His face, once animated with fierce ambition, now hardened into something colder. Lines etched deeper around his eyes. His words, once inspiring, grew harsh, sharp with frustration. He blamed deserters, blamed the courtiers who had betrayed him, blamed Yoritomo for turning kin into executioners. Perhaps in his private moments, he even blamed himself. But if so, he never let it show. Through it all, Tomoe remained at his side. She rode close, a silent sentinel, her loyalty unspoken but unbreakable. Perhaps she still believed victory was possible, or perhaps she simply refused to imagine a world where she lived without the path of war, without Yoshinaka's command to anchor her. By late January, their ragged force reached the snowy fields of Awazu. It was here that Yoshinaka would make his stand. The place itself was no fortress, no high walls, no deep moats, just open land, hemmed by forests and rivers, now frozen and slick with ice. It was the kind of battlefield where numbers mattered most, and Yoshinaka had far too few. Scouts brought grim news. Yoshitsune and Noriori were marching swiftly, their armies fresh, disciplined, far outnumbering Yoshinaka's broken ranks. Some men muttered prayers. Others gripped their spears with white knuckles, staring into the distance as if already seeing their deaths approach. On the eve of battle, Yoshinaka called his retainers together. Around a small fire, the last of his generals sat, their armor dented, their faces drawn. He spoke not of retreat, for there was none. He spoke of honor, of meeting death with courage, of leaving behind a name that would be remembered. The men nodded, their silence heavier than words. Tomoe sat among them, her helmet resting at her side. She listened, her eyes fixed on Yoshinaka. She had heard the speeches of many lords before, but this was different. This was not a man rallying his troops for victory. This was a man preparing them for the end. When the meeting broke, Tomoe walked among the soldiers. She adjusted their armor straps, offered a word here, a steady look there. For some, it was enough to banish despair. For others, it was a final comfort. In those small gestures, Tomoe bound them together, not with promises of life, but with the certainty that their deaths would not be forgotten. That night, the snow fell thick and heavy, muffling the world into silence. The flames of the camp flickered weakly, casting long shadows on the frozen ground. Tomoe stood watch alone, the cold cutting into her bones, the weight of what was to come pressing upon her. She gazed toward the dark horizon, knowing that beyond it, Yoshitsune's banners were already approaching. When dawn broke, the field at Awazu glistened white, as if the heavens had laid out a burial shroud. Yoshinaka mounted his horse, his banner raised high. Around him, the remnants of his army gathered, and beside him, as always, rode Tomoe Gozen, her armor gleaming, her eyes hard, her hand ready to write her name into the snow with steel. The road had ended. The final act was about to begin. The morning at Awazu cracked open like ice under a boot. Light spilled over the white field, bright and cold, and the breath of horses made the air look like smoke. Banners snapped, bowstrings sang, steel rang against steel. The sound rolled across the plain in waves. Tomoe Gozen did not wait for the storm to reach her. She made the first move. She nudged her horse forward at a calm walk, then a steady trot, then a hard charge that shook the frost from the reeds. Her armor was polished, her bow was already in her hand. She rose in the saddle and loosed the first arrow. It flew straight and true. A rider in the front ranks folded and slid from his horse without a cry. The line rippled. Another arrow, another fall, then the third. By the fourth arrow, men had started to turn their heads. They were looking for the source of the trouble. They were looking for the shape that did not fit. Someone shouted her name. Someone else laughed as if it were a joke. Then they saw her face. They understood. If pride had a sound, it was the groan of men realizing their story had room for a woman who would not break. Tomoe was already moving. She stowed the bow and drew her sword in one smooth motion. The blade flashed bright as the winter sun. She leaned forward, and her horse leapt into the narrow gap that shock had opened in the enemy line. For a heartbeat, the world went quiet, as if the field itself were holding its breath. Then she went to work. Her first cut was short and economical, ribs to collarbone. The second cut was longer, a rising arc that knocked away a spear and split a helm. A third strike opened a path for the men behind her. They poured in with a ragged cheer, carried by her momentum, by the sight of one rider making room where there was none. Battle usually looks like confusion, not here. Around Tomoe, things became simple. She was a fixed point in a broken compass. Men measured their courage by how close they dared to fight beside her. The closest survived. The ones who kept their distance fell to arrows they never saw. And still, the numbers pressed down like a mountain. Yoshinaka's troops were too few. His cousins had come with fresh horses, fresh men, fresh hunger. Every gain cost blood. Every yard won was bought twice, then taken back. Tomoe felt the weight of that math and refused it. She made the moment larger than the numbers. She wheeled right to meet a wedge of enemy cavalry. Their point man lowered his spear and shouted for her to yield. She did not answer. She lifted her blade in a small salute and rode straight at him. At the last instant, she shifted her knee. Her horse slid left. The spear glanced off her shoulder guard. Her sword came down in a short chop, and the man vanished from the saddle. She kicked his spear free before it hit the ground and passed it to one of Yoshinaka's riders without looking back. A cluster of archers tried to fix her in place with a volley. She read their hands, their breathing, the rhythm of their drawing. She counted. 1, 2, 3. She sank low and spurred hard. Arrows hissed over her and rattled against the backs of her men. She shot back on the run, not to kill but to make the archers duck. Two of Yoshinaka's foot soldiers reached them a heartbeat later, and the archers' careful line collapsed into panic. 10 paces away, a young spearman froze, eyes wide, lips blue in the cold. Tomoe saw him and reined in. She spoke without raising her voice. "Hold the line. Keep your knees soft. Breathe with the horse." He nodded. He did what she said. When the next rush hit, he bent but did not break. The men on either side bent with him and found their balance. They survived that crush because one rider reminded them how. Hooks for the listener happen in the gaps between noise. This was one of them. The field was chaos, but inside her circle, time stretched. You could feel the hand behind the blade. You could feel the mind behind the hand. A heavy rider barreled toward her now, big as a gate, fur over steel, voice like a drum. "Onda Moroshigi of Echigo," men whispered. They said he had arms like mill beams and a laugh you could hear from a tower. He cut a path with a long glaive, sweeping men from their saddles as if clearing brush. Tomoe angled toward him. Their horses blew steam and scraped iron shoes on ice. He leveled the glaive and shouted that he would make a lesson of her. She did not answer. She never argued with men who announced themselves. She let them speak to the cold air, because the air did not care. They closed. He swung first. A wide cut meant to end the matter. She ducked inside the arc, close enough to smell leather and sweat and the pine oil on his beard. Her left hand shot out and caught the haft under his blade. Then a twist, a pull. The iron whipped past her ear. She felt it scrape her helmet and take a lock of hair. Her right hand flashed. She struck his bridle. His horse reared, hooves pouring at the grey sky. The big man toppled backward. He hit the ground hard enough to jar the teeth from his jaw. Before he could rise, she was off her horse and on him, knee on breastplate, sword point under his chin. "Yield," she said, not to spare him, but to fix his fear in memory. He spat blood and reached for a knife. She pushed. The blade went home. His body went slack. She rose, clean and efficient, and remounted. The men who had crowded in to see her fall backed away. A path opened not from courtesy, but because no one wanted to be next. Another hook, a deeper one. Word raced down the line faster than a drumbeat. A woman had thrown Onda Moroshig like a sack and ended him as if he were nothing. Stories grow in war the way brush fires spread in dry wind. The story of that moment jumped the ditch and lit the next field. Tomoe moved again. She did not linger for applause. She did not look for witnesses. She looked for leverage, and she found it in small places. A knot of men cut off from their captain. She drew the enemy away from them with a feint, then drew the captain's eye with a single arrow that scraped his cheek and left him shaking. A banner party trying to plant a standard on a rise to mark the turning of the battle. She tore it down and tossed it to a boy with a broken nose and told him to run it back. He ran the way a fox runs from a dog, all speed and instinct. Across the field, Yoshinaka held his center with raw stubbornness. He seemed to grow smaller as the day wore on, not in body, but in presence, like a lamp guttering as the oil runs low. Tomoe watched him in quick glances and felt the pull that had carried her through 100 charges. He was still her lord. She would not give him a quiet death. If death had to come, it would come with noise. The enemy brought up fresh reserves. Their horses were not tired. Their armor was not dented. Tomoe's shoulders ached. Her hands burned from cold and friction. She rolled them and kept riding. A spear grazed her thigh. Hot wet spread inside her greave and then turned cold as the wind found it. She ignored it. Pain had no place in the work. A captain with a painted mask tried to flank the remnant of Yoshinaka's right. Tomoe cut across the slope to meet him. They traded 3 quick blows, steel on steel, short and heavy. He tried to pull her down by her bridle. She slipped the rein, leaned into his space and drove her shoulder into his chest. He lost breath. She stole the half-second that gave her. Her blade rose. Her blade fell. He was gone. She took his place in his own line for 2 breaths, shouting orders at men who did not realize until later they had obeyed the voice of the enemy. Tension builds in layers. The first is surprise. The second is respect. The last is fear. Tomoe laid those layers one on the other, until the men before her began to glance at the edges of their vision, looking for exits that did not exist. Still, numbers grind even courage to powder. Everywhere beyond her circle, the field sagged. Men slipped and fell and did not rise. Arrows ran out, swords dulled on bone and ice. The ground turned from white to grey to brown to something darker. The smell thickened. Iron, mud, smoke. The sweet, sick weight of breath leaving bodies. Tomoe found herself suddenly alone at the very tip of a torn wedge, her own men held back by a snarl of horses and corpses. 5 riders ringed her. They circled in the cautious, mean way of men who did not want to die, but wanted very much to be the one who killed her. She turned her horse in place to face them. She made a small show of adjusting her glove. The gesture said she had time. It said they did not. The first came in too fast. She let him. She slid right and cut low. His thigh opened and he screamed the way men scream when they suddenly understand how much of them is blood. The second hung back and tried to reach her with a spear. She batted it aside, caught the tip under her arm and pulled. He lost it and stared at his empty hand like it had betrayed him. The third and fourth tried to hit her together. She stepped her horse backward on a neat diagonal, and they smashed into each other in a clatter that sounded like dropped pans. The fifth turned his head to look for help. She spurred and struck him in that exact heartbeat of doubt. By the time her men broke through to her, the ring was gone. In its place were 5 wrong choices cooling in the snow. She paused then, not to rest, but to breathe on purpose. In through the nose, out through the mouth. She scanned the field. She listened. The sounds told the truth plain. The pressure on their left was growing. The center was bending. The right was a thread. She rode for the left. On her way, she passed a boy, no more than a new beard, kneeling beside his fallen brother. The boy's hands shook so hard he could not tie the strap on his bracer. Tomoe reined in and knelt without dismounting. She tied the strap with quick fingers. He stared at her as if she were a ghost. She touched his shoulder. "Hold the line," she said, "one breath at a time." Then she was gone, and for the rest of that day he did not move his feet. On the left, a cluster of Yoshitsune's veterans were punching holes through a hedge of spears. They moved like a single animal, practiced and mean. Tomoe cut into their flank with 3 riders. She did not try to break them. She tried to break their rhythm. She found the man calling the pace by how his head tilted before each step. She put an arrow through his throat from 10 paces. The unit stumbled. Her 3 riders drove into the opening. That part of the line breathed for the first time in 10 minutes. From the hill beyond, a horn blew. It was not one of theirs. Fresh enemy cavalry crested the rise. Sun flashed on their points. Their hooves struck sparks. The field seemed to tilt toward them. Tomoe felt the tilt in her bones. She could have pulled back then to the safety of Yoshinaka's banner. She did not. She spurred directly uphill at the oncoming wave. The first rider in the new wedge had a face like carved bark and eyes as small as seeds. He lowered his lance for the perfect center hit. Tomoe crooked her arm and raised her bow as a shield. The lance struck and skittered off the ashwood with a loud, ugly twang. The shock numbed her hand to the elbow. She dropped the bow without looking and took the man's reins as if he had offered them. Her sword punched under his arm and found the seam in his armor. He folded forward onto his horse's neck. She shoved him aside and sent the empty mount crashing into the riders behind him. 2 more tried to ride her down by weight. She slid low on the side of her saddle in the old step trick. 1 calf hooked over the cantle, body almost horizontal, the horse between her and the blades. Steel whistled over her. She laughed once, a short, sharp sound that made the nearest rider flinch. She came up from the low hang with a thrust that took him clean under the jaw. He tipped backward with his hands still clawing at the air. A small thing happened then, but it changed the color of the fight around her. A drummer on the enemy hill missed a beat, not because he was hurt, because he was staring. The gap in the rhythm spread like a stain. Men moved a half step off their plan. A half step in a battle is a mile. Even so, the strain told. Tomoe's breath steamed in heavy ropes now. Her thigh throbbed. The cut on her shoulder had gone from burn to ache to nothing, which worried her more than pain. She swapped the sword to her left hand for a dozen strokes to ease the right. Her horse blew hard and tossed its head. She leaned forward and pressed her cheek to its neck for a heartbeat. "Thank you," she said into the warm hair. Then she straightened and found more work. Across the plain, beyond the tangle and the noise, Yoshinaka's banner dipped. Not fallen, dipped. A sign or an accident. She could not tell. The sight put a cold hand on her heart. She swallowed it down. This is the point where a story either breaks or becomes a legend. For most commanders, the choice is math. Save what you can. Pull to a fortress. Live to fight again. For Tomoe, the choice was simpler and harder. Make meaning here. Make it so bright they have to squint to look at it. Make it so loud they will still hear it when they are old. She found a captain of her own men. Helmet split, blood on his lip. Still smiling, the crooked smile of a man who likes the game even when he is losing. She told him to hold the left with 20 men and a prayer. He nodded as if she had handed him a warm cloak. She gathered 10 riders who still had light in their eyes. She pointed them toward the heart of the enemy press. With her as the arrowhead, they went. They hit like a thrown hammer and blew clean through to empty ground before anyone believed it. Tomoe wheeled and hit again from the new side. Then again. The third pass broke a knot of veterans who had not broken in years. She did not give chase. She let them run to spread fear backward through their own line like dye in water. And yet, the field beyond her narrow winds was going dark. The center was buckling. The right was nearly gone. She could hear the tone of the noise changing. Fewer men shouting commands. More men calling for mothers and gods. She could smell the end the way a hunter smells rain before it falls. She cut down one more rider and looked up through the swinging banners, through the steam and smoke, toward the shallow rise where Yoshinaka fought with what remained of his guard. She saw him clearly for the first time in an hour. He looked small, an outline against the winter sky. He turned his head as if he had heard her from 100 paces. For a breath, lord and retainer found each other across the ruin. He lifted his blade in greeting or farewell. She could not tell which. A scream to her left snapped the moment. 3 enemy riders had slipped past her men and were arrowing for the banner of a boy standard-bearer, barely older than the one whose strap she had tied. She went after them at once, legs tight, weight forward, the world tunneling down to hooves and breath and the bright coin of a target. She caught the last rider first, took him at the knee, and left him thrashing. The second turned to meet her and lost his balance on churned ice. Her blade kissed his neck and he sank without a sound. The third reached the boy and lifted his sword to cut the pole. Tomoe threw hers. The sword spun end over end, a flash and a whistle, and struck the rider's wrist. He dropped his weapon and flung his hand back with a curse. Tomoe was on him before the sword hit the ground. She caught her own blade on the bounce the way a juggler catches a tossed ball. She smiled, not for pride, but because the thing had worked. And sometimes joy is that simple. The boy stared at her, mouth open, banner shaking. "Keep it high," she said. He did. He would, even after she was gone. She turned again toward the rise where Yoshinaka fought. The picture had changed. The press around him thickened. The banner dipped once more, deeper this time. The sound that reached her from that direction had a new edge. The edge had a name. It was ending. Tomoe took a long breath and squared her shoulders. She checked her quiver by habit, though she already knew the answer. 3 arrows left. Her sword edge nicked from bone. Her horse foamed at the neck. Her thigh throbbed in a steady drum. She did the small things. She tightened a strap. She rewrapped a glove. She combed hair from her eyes with blood-sticky fingers. She was ready to cut back to Yoshinaka. She was ready to spend whatever was left of her on that hill. She set her heels. Her horse gathered itself. And then, through the crush and the clamor, a messenger broke free and rode hard toward her, face white, mouth open, voice already forming the words that would change everything. He was bringing a last order. The field seemed to lean in to listen. The wind paused. Tomoe reined in, eyes fixed on the rider, jaw set, heart steady. What command could turn a warrior like her away from the heart of the fight, away from the man she had followed through fire and frost? The answer would carve the rest of her life. The messenger reined in hard, snow spraying from his horse's hooves. His mouth worked before the sound came. "Lord Yoshinaka orders you to withdraw." For a second, Tomoe did not move. Wind tugged at the loose strands of her hair. The field roared around her. She heard the words again, quieter this time. as if they were being said inside her armor. "Withdraw." The rider swallowed. He added the rest, voice shaking. He says a commander must not be remembered dying with a woman at his side. He says live, or at least do not be taken. There it was. Pride. Love twisted into command. Mercy wrapped in shame. Tomoe closed her eyes and breathed once, slow. She was loyal to the man and to the code. Both pulled in different directions. She turned her horse without a word and rode toward the rise where Yoshinaka fought. She would not leave on a rumor and a shout. She would take the order from his own breath or not at all. The climb felt longer than it was. Bodies lay in drifts like fallen logs. Arrows stuck from the snow like reed beds. Yoshinaka's guard formed a hard ring around him, thin now, light in the eyes but still standing. Yoshinaka himself sat straight in the saddle. His armor was dented and scratched. Blood darkened one sleeve. He looked at her, and in that look she found the boy she had followed into his first victory. The man she had followed into Kyoto, the lord she had followed into this winter. He did not shout. He did not waste words. "Go, Tomoe," he said. "You have given me everything. Take back your life. Do not let them make sport of you." There were 1,000 things she could have said. "I will not leave you. I will die here. Let me break their line one more time." But this was not a debate. This was a gift and a wound in the same hand. She bowed her head. "Very well, my lord." Then she lifted her eyes. "One last deed," she said. "Let me leave a mark no one can scrub away." Yoshinaka's mouth twitched at the corner. "Be swift." Tomoe wheeled her horse downslope like a hawk dropping from a perch. She scanned the press for a name that would matter. Hatakeyama Shigetada rode with the enemy that day, a famed rider with a clean record and a hard jaw. Near him, men pointed and called orders as if he were a tower that could not fall. Tomoe set her course. She cut through knots of fighting like a blade through wet silk. She did not linger to finish men who were already dying. She saved her breath. She saved her strength. She kept her eyes on the man who could carry her message to the ages just by losing. Shigetada saw her coming. He turned his horse to face her square. Good, she thought. No trick then. She loosened her shoulders and rolled her neck. Her thigh burned. Her right hand tingled where the lance had struck her bow. She closed her fingers tighter around her sword. The feeling came back. They met at a canter that became a charge. The sound of their horses swallowed the noise of the field. Shigetada's spear dipped, point hunting the seam in her armor. Tomoe swayed and the point scraped along her breastplate with a hiss. She struck once, twice, testing. Steel on ash. He was strong and sure. Good hands, clean feet, no waste. He pressed hard and sudden to knock her back on raw weight. She did not give ground. She slid around his horse's shoulder and cut at the strap of his shield. The leather parted. The shield slipped and bit into his bridle. His mount tossed its head and lost a step. She took the step from him the way a thief takes a purse, fast and gone before the cry. Her sword flashed, edge catching the gap under his arm. The blade bit deep. Hot blood washed her hand. Shigetada's eyes widened. He tried to wrench free and counter. She stayed in the pocket, close where his spear meant nothing. She hooked her knee over his saddle flap, grabbed the rim of his cuirass and pulled with all the anger she had swallowed since the messenger spoke. He came out of the saddle like a fish from a net, arms flailing, boots kicking ice. He hit the ground. The breath left him in a grunt. She was off her horse before he started to rise. "Yield," she said. He looked up, proud even now, and reached for a knife at his belt. She drove the point home cleanly and held him until his hands stopped moving. Then she stood, lifted his helm in one hand and raised her sword in the other. Men near enough to see it froze. Men farther off felt it in the way noise shifts when a thing happens that should not be possible. The story left the circle of blades and ran. Tomoe did not shout. She did not pose. She tossed the helm to one of Yoshinaka's riders and swung back into her saddle. "Done," she murmured. "Now I go." Hook, for the listener. Victory is sweet, but the cost is about to come due. She pointed her horse away from the rise, away from Yoshinaka's banner, away from the place where her name had taken root. She meant to cut wide and vanish through a stand of black pines, then break south along the frozen river. "Live," he had said. "Do not be taken." She had gone 30 lengths when a sound, thin but sharp, cut through the cold. A horn call, she knew, the call Yoshinaka's men used to signal a breach. She turned in the saddle. On the hill, the ring around her lord wavered. A banner tipped and shuddered. The enemy surged like a black wave. She almost went back. Her body leaned. Her horse felt it and gathered itself. Then she saw a rider break from Yoshinaka's side like a spark from a fire. He carried no banner. He needed none. His posture told his name. Imai Kanehira, Yoshinaka's foster brother, the one who had laughed in every bad hour and made men brave by standing near them. He fought backward, covering Yoshinaka's flank, his spear a fast straight line among curved blades. 3 came at him. He took 2 and broke the third man's wrist with the butt of the shaft. He looked once over his shoulder, gauging the slope, the bodies, the chance. Kanehira understood the math. There would be no capture. Not for him, not for his lord. He put the shaft of his spear in his mouth, reins in his left hand, and kicked his horse hard. The animal sprang forward. Kanehira leaned far over the side and drove himself headfirst into a boulder, the old warrior's brutal answer to the shame of chains. The sound was dull and final. His body slid into the snow like a dropped cloak. The men who saw it faltered. The world tilted. Yoshinaka sat his horse alone now, breathing hard, hair loose, eyes bright with a strange calm. He turned the head of his mount toward the shallow river at the base of the hill. Ice shelled the surface in thin plates. He spurred into it. The horse stumbled as water took its feet. Arrows hissed. 2 struck. Yoshinaka leaned, caught himself, and tried to rise. A spear found him then under the ribs. He gripped the shaft with both hands and pushed it out and back at the man who held it. The man fell. Another came. Steel flashed. The water went still. Tomoe watched from the edge of the pines, fists tight on her reins. The order had saved her life and stolen the moment she was made for. The code said, "Obey." Her heart said, "Break it." She did not move. She could not move. If she turned back now, she would die near him. There was honor in that. There was also the waste of a name that could carry further than a single hill. She forced her hands to loosen. She made her breath smooth. She turned her horse's head to the trees. 2 enemy riders cut across her path, eager to claim a prize. She did not slow. She took the first with a thrust to the throat that she did not even feel. She hooked the second man's knee with her boot and sent him spinning from the saddle. She did not look down to see him land. The pines took her in. Needles caught at her armor with small sounds like rain on a roof. The battle thinned behind her, noise dimming with each stride. She aimed for the low ground and the band of ice-gray river that wound through reeds and brush. There would be patrols along the banks. There would be soft places in the snow where a horse could break a leg. There would be men with nothing to do tomorrow, who would spend that empty day looking for the woman who had made them feel small. She eased her horse to a careful walk and listened. A jay called once, harsh and bright. The wind creaked the trees. Far off, a horn blew, then lost itself among the trunks. She reached the river and followed its edge. Where the ice was thick, she led the horse across, stepping where the snow was unbroken. Where the ice looked thin, she cut reeds and brushed her tracks. She moved like a hunter who has become the hunted. She did not look back. Hook, what happens to a legend when history turns away? By dusk, she had put 3 small valleys between herself and Owazu. The land quieted. Smoke from the battle drifted like a low cloud in the distance. In the near dark, she found an old charcoal burner's hut and led her horse inside. She shut the door and leaned her back against it, suddenly aware of the pain in her leg, the ache in her shoulders, the rawness of her throat. Her hands shook. She let them shake. Then she stilled them by force. She spoke aloud to the empty room. "Live, do not be taken." The words steadied her. She unbuckled her armor piece by piece, laying each plate on the packed earth with care. She cleaned her sword with a rag she found in a corner. The blade came up bright again, nicked but sound. She ran a thumb over the edge and felt the small bites it had taken from bone. She did not flinch. She slept in fits, dreamless, waking at every small sound. At dawn, she was already moving, back in the saddle, head low under the branches. She turned north first to mislead any who tracked her. then cut west toward hills where no one would think to look. She passed 2 farmsteads and a shrine half buried in snow. At the shrine she stopped, dismounted, and stood for a long minute in the cold. She did not pray. She simply stood. Then she mounted and went on. In the days that followed, the story of Owazu spread faster than she could ride. Men told it in tea houses and barracks, on river barges and in city lanes. They argued details. They agreed on the point. There had been a woman on that field who fought like a storm and left the air changed. What became of her after she vanished from the snow? Here, the road breaks into paths. One path says she was captured and forced into marriage with an enemy lord, made to trade steel for silk and carry her silence like a blade hidden under a sleeve. Another says she shaved her head and entered a nunnery in Ekizan, living out her years in quiet labor and long prayers, a warrior set to scrubbing floors to wear the edge off memory. A third has her riding east under a different name, taking service with a small clan and fighting small wars no one wrote down. Because some fires burn best when the world is not watching. The Heike storytellers would later add their own colors. They would polish the jewels. They would sharpen the lines. They would give her speeches she never made and lovers she never needed. They would make her beautiful when beauty was the least interesting thing about her. They would do what storytellers do, turn a life into a lamp for their own time. But for Tomoe, on that first night after Owazu, there was no song and no lamp. There was only breath seen in cold air, a horse that trusted her, a blade cleaned and oiled, and a choice held like a live coal in the center of her chest. Live, do not be taken. She chose to live, which meant that the ending others wrote for her would never be neat. A final beat before we leave this field. On the 3rd day after the battle, a group of peasants walked the churned ground at Owazu with baskets and poles, gathering arrowheads for scrap and dead men for burial. They found a broken spear near a large rock, the shaft stained dark at one end. They found a horse's hoofprints leading down into thin ice that had cracked and frozen again. They found a crest half buried in slush, the antlered badge of Kiso Yoshinaka, caught under a thin skim like a leaf in glass. They stood and looked at it for a long time. Then they left it there. Some things the snow keeps for itself. Morning came soft and grey after Owazu. The wind had lost its teeth. Smoke from burned fuses drifted low over the plain. Crows walked the ruts where horses had fallen and pecked at torn saddles. Peasants with poles and baskets picked their way along the churned ground, quiet as if they were in a shrine. They stopped when they reached the shallow river and stared at the broken ice, listening for a sound that would not return. By noon, the story had already left the field. A teamster carried it first, muttering to himself as he steered an ox cart past the last checkpoint. A soldier with a cut ear repeated it in a tea stall on the edge of the next town. A boy sweeping ash under a brazier heard the words "woman warrior" and forgot to breathe until his mother tapped the back of his head. By nightfall, under paper lanterns and smoke-stained rafters, men were telling other men about a rider who fought like winter itself, and each telling shaved the tale a little smoother. Hooks live in the moment a rumor meets a need. This rumor found many needs. In Kyoto, courtiers sat behind screens painted with cranes and pines and pretended to speak calmly. They had new masters again. They learned new names and new rules the way people learn a new prayer, softly, hoping not to be caught getting it wrong. When someone whispered the name Tomoe, some smiled as if hearing a charming lie. Some frowned as if hearing an insult to order. A few said nothing at all and simply listened for the details that always matter. Who saw her? Whose man fell? Where did she ride after? In Kamakura, where Yoritomo held court, the tale arrived stripped of frills and heavy with use. Commanders heard it and nodded once. Useful facts separated themselves from admiration. A woman on the field. Elite riders turned. Morale broke in a pocket that should have held. A single rider used well can be a blade that opens a seam in cloth. The seam can become a rip. The rip can become a fall. They wrote this down. They filed it under lessons. Out on roads that ran along the sea, men who had once begged with lutes across their knees heard the name and sat up straighter. Blind singers with strong hands. Monks who carried old stories in new voices. They lived by making memory sound like a bell. To them, Tomoe was not a scandal. She was a gift. a bright figure who could walk into their verses and leave footprints anyone could follow. The song found a shape on their tongues. It traveled with them through harvest fairs and temple gates, through fishing villages and mountain way stations. In one town, a storyteller struck the drum a little harder when he reached the jewel at the heart of the tale. In the next town, a different man paused longer at the last order, letting the silence spin a tight thread. The threads crossed. A pattern formed. It was called a tale, but really it was a net. It caught anyone who listened. Listen closely, and you can hear how legends are built. First, there is a deed, something clean and hard that fits in a single breath. A rider unseats a giant. A blade finds the seam. A banner stays high. Second, there is a witness. Many are best, but one will do if he speaks with a steady voice and looks you in the eye. He says he was there. He says he saw. He tells you what the snow smelled like and what the iron tasted like when it touched his tongue by accident because he was breathing too fast. He gives you a small true thing to anchor a large bright one. Third, there is a repeat. The deed becomes a mark on a drum. The mark becomes a measure. The measure becomes a song. Sing it enough times and it puts down roots you cannot see. Deed, witness, repeat. That is the triangle a legend stands on. But there was a problem the songs could not solve. After the field went quiet, Tomoe's body did not lie among the others. Her crest did not turn up in a ditch. A spear shaft had no name carved into it that could be read by men who buried the dead. She had left the story alive, and when a living person walks out of a finished tale, the tale grows restless. It wants an ending. So endings grew to meet it. One ending said she was taken captive and married off for show, a jewel mounted in the wrong crown. This version made uneasy men feel safe. It put a blade back in a sheath and tied the knot tight. A woman who defied the line must be brought back inside the line, and marriage was the cleanest rope. Another ending said she shaved her head and entered a nunnery. In Ekuzen, the battle voice turned inward. The body that carried so much steel now washing bowls, raking gravel, sweeping leaves into neat piles before the wind undid the work. This ending fed a softer hunger. It made of her a lesson in letting go, the warrior who learned the last discipline, silence. A third ending said she took a new name and kept riding in smaller wars that never reached the ears of men with drums. It said the right people recognized her seat in the saddle from half a field away and gave her room without ever saying why. It said she died old, with scars that ached when the rain came, looking out at a line of hills at dusk. No temple bell marked the hour, no court scribe wrote a line. A neighbor remembered that she split kindling with a single strike, clean to the last sliver. Which ending is true, the field does not tell us. The river keeps its own counsel. Records from the time are thin where they should be thick, and thick where they should be thin. Clerks wrote what their lords wished to read. Monks wrote what their patrons paid to hear. Silence, too, is a kind of writing. Meanwhile, the picture makers went to work. On long paper scrolls, brush lines became rushing horses and sharp faces. A woman's armor gleamed in ink and gold. You could unroll a scene and watch the moment lengthen across the table. Banner, bend of a knee, cut of a blade, shock in the eyes of the man who thought he could not fall. A child kneeling beside his grandfather's knee could point and ask, "Who is she?" The old man could tap the page and say, "That is Tomoe," and the child would nod and file the name under things that are real. In the markets, woodblock prints came later with cheaper ink and rougher lines, the kind of images a fishmonger could tack to a post for a week until the sun bleached it and the rain took it down. In those prints, Tomoe sometimes looked like a court beauty dressed for a dance with a helmet balanced like a hairpin. Sometimes she looked like a storm with a face. The truth of a picture is not what it shows. It is what it leaves in the eye when you look away. Mothers told daughters the story at the hearth in a softer register. They did not recite the catalogue of blows or name the men whose pride broke like ice. They said a woman rode where men said women could not ride. She knew the work. She kept her seat. She left when leaving was the sharper courage. Daughters hearing this did not dream of battle. They dreamed of rooms where their voices would not be made small. War wives told it another way, because they knew what a winter march did to hands and backs and hope. They praised the steady things, the tying of a strap, the right word at the right time, the choice to keep breathing when easy choices run out. They heard a different kind of steel in Tomoe's name, and the men who measured themselves by a code heard the code answer back. They argued about Yoshinaka's last command. Was it mercy? Was it vanity? Was it the final duty of a lord to pull a loyal blade out of a losing fight? In their schools, they made neat points and set them on shelves like labeled stones. On quiet nights alone, they wondered what they would have done with the messenger at their stirrup and the hill burning behind him. Here is a small, plain truth that slid beneath the noise and stayed there. Tomoe broke no oath when she lived. She kept the last order. She did not allow herself to be turned into a trophy for someone else's story. She carried her name forward. Sometimes courage is not the loud cut in the center of the field. Sometimes it is the steady hand on the rein when the story begs you to make a dramatic mistake. For creators and tellers, those who build long bridges of attention and try to walk people across, her afterlife teaches a clear frame. Memory is a market. It rewards clarity, cadence, and a clean line of feeling. But it also respects quiet choices when the quiet makes sense. A strong story needs a bright deed, yes. It also needs a path out of the deed that does not insult the deed. Leave the right doors open. Even the honorific attached to her name, Gozen, a polite title that can mean lady, did work in the telling. It put respect in the mouth before the name. It softened the surprise. It asked a listener to hold two ideas at once, a title of grace, a rider of war. That tension hummed. Tellings that forgot the hum lost the flavor. Years ran like water, and still her name kept catching on small stones. A monk composing a battle chronicle paused over the line where she enters and leaves. He added a single adjective, peerless, and set down his brush. A young retainer posted to a far province traced the two characters of her name on a scrap of paper and folded it into his sleeve before a skirmish. A girl in a mountain town put on her brother's cracked helmet when no one was looking and practiced mounting a stool as if it were a horse. The stool wobbled. She set her feet and tried again, but admiration has its shadow. There were men who sharpened their pride on her story the wrong way. They said she was an exception that proved their rule. They said the lesson was that no second Tomoe would be allowed. In their hands, the tale became a fence. They did not notice how many people had already walked around it, and still the songs did their slow, patient work. A verse here, a drum there, a pause at the right moment, the kind that opens a little cave in the listener's chest. It is easy to think legend is a storm that comes down all at once. More often it is snow. It falls in small pieces. It settles. It shapes the world while you are looking elsewhere. So when a traveler stepped under the eaves of a roadside shrine years later to get out of a sudden rain and saw a woman leading an old horse past with a scar along her jaw and a way of moving that made space around her, he opened his mouth to ask a question and then closed it. It is useful to keep certain questions unsaid. He bowed instead. She bowed back without breaking stride. He stood in the rain long after she had gone and could not say why the moment felt complete. What does a story owe the truth? What does the truth owe a story? These are not riddles for books. They are small, daily choices made by anyone who speaks about anyone else. Tomoe's life pressed against those choices. It still does. You can feel it in the way people lower their voice a little when they say her name, as if trying not to disturb something that is still moving. Before we test the record against the song, before we lay the chronicle and the tale side by side to see where they meet and part, there is one more thing worth holding steady in the mind. The field at Owazu did not end when the last horse fell. It ran forward through mouths and hands, across pages and stages, into rooms where girls tied their hair differently after hearing a drum. If you look back from here, you can see the line of it, thin and bright as the edge of a well-kept blade. And if you look ahead, there is a harder question waiting on the road. Who decides which version of a life survives? Snow keeps secrets, ink does not, but ink lies in a slower way. After Owazu, names traveled in two caravans. One moved on paper under temple roofs and in magistrate rooms. Clerks copied lines by lantern light, careful hands, careful tones. The other moved on breath and drum from road shrine to river town, quick and bright. Tomoe's name rode both paths, and the paths did not always meet. In the written accounts, the lines are tight. A winter battle, a lord undone by kin, a woman retainer who fought fiercely and withdrew at her master's order. The writers do not linger. They do not tell you what the wind felt like on her cheek. They give you a frame and move on. That is the work of a chronicle. It stacks facts where someone with rank can find them later. On the road, the tellers breathe space into the same frame. They slow the duel until a heartbeat becomes a page. They pause at the last order, long enough for you to taste the iron in your mouth. They give you a face to hold in your mind when you close your eyes. That is the work of a song. It puts a lamp where a crossroad needs one. Both kinds of telling shape what survives. Ask a clerk what really happened, and he will point to names, dates, seals, the neat edges of a page. Ask a singer, and he will point to the place in your chest where the story lands. Which is true? Both are, and neither is, because truth is a house with many rooms. Tomoe's steps echoed through several at once. Some records suggest she was taken after the battle and married into a rival line, a tidy end that soothed men who feared a loose thread. Other lines insist she laid down the blade and shaved her head, living out her years in the hush of a temple, a lesson in quiet strength. A third stream carries her forward under a new name, riding small campaigns that no clerk bothered to count, alive in the work long after the big story had shut its doors. The lack of one official end troubled tidy minds. Tidy minds do not like doors left open, but open doors are how light moves from one room to the next. That is why Tomoe endures. She does not finish where others demand. Watch how a legend grows when the ending is not nailed to the floor. A monk copying a battle tale in the next generation adds one adjective that was not there before: peerless. It is a small stone dropped into a deep well. The rings it makes are quiet and wide. A painter takes the same jewel and unrolls it across a scroll. He makes the horse's legs longer. He makes the snow brighter. He gives Tomoe a calm face and sharp eyes that do not look at the man she is about to unseat. They look past him. They look into the distance where the next choice waits. A child sees that distance and feels bigger inside for reasons he cannot name. A woodblock carver 3 centuries later turns the same scene into a print you can buy for the price of a fast meal. He simplifies lines so they read from across a busy street. The helmet crest becomes a bold shape. The blade becomes a bright stripe. A fishmonger tacks the sheet to a post. For a week, people pass and nod. Then rain takes the paper down. The picture is gone. The idea stays. In each retelling, someone trims and someone adds. Beauty grows where it sells. Valor grows where it heals. Sometimes the trimming and adding go too far. A teller who has never felt a saddle's sway turns Tomoe into a court flower holding a blade like a fan. Another, eager to make a point about men, makes her a scold with steel, no joy in the ride. The center sags when a teller forgets that she loved the work. There is a simple test that keeps a story honest. Ask who benefits from this version. If the answer is only the teller, beware. If the answer is also the listener, listen closer. If the answer is the subject, you may be near a true line. By this measure, the quiet endings serve her well. A forced marriage only serves those who need to put a lid on her. A cloister, or a new name, both protect the choice her lord gave her. Live. Do not be taken. The code did not ask her to stop. It asked her to carry a name forward without letting others make a banner of her skin. Creators and builders can learn a working frame here. Call it the record ladder. Deed at the bottom, chronicle next. Performance above that, print and picture next. Stage and screen at the top. Each rung lifts the same event farther from the ground where it happened. Each rung also lets more people touch it. The higher you go, the more duty you owe the low rungs. When you stand on stage or cut a trailer, you borrow weight from paper and breath and snow. Pay it back with care. There is a second frame worth holding. Call it the bias check. When you choose a source, ask 3 plain questions. Who paid for this? Who was this meant to please? Who could not speak when this was made? With Tomoe, patrons often wanted order. Scribes served patrons. That is why the most daring thing in the written lines is not the sword work. It is the sentence that lets her leave. Halfway through this chapter, pause and taste the hook. If the sources pull different ways, which thread do you trust when you build your own telling? Most people trust the thread that sings. That is not a mistake. Song is how memory breathes, but song without ground drifts. So anchor your song. Touch dirt. In Tomoe's case, the dirt is simple and hard. A woman trained with bow and sword rode beside a rising lord. She led men in battle and beat more than one champion. In the last hour, she obeyed an order that cut across her heart and left the field alive. Everything else is frame and paint. Now look at the way her name worked on people who needed it. A young retainer with a fast mouth and a slow temper hears the tale and learns a quieter kind of courage. He keeps his place in line when slighted and chooses to show his worth by being ready at the worst hour, not the bright one. A girl told to take small steps copies the way Tomoe sits her horse, not with anger, but with weight in the hips and a straight line from heel to crown. She feels the difference in her spine. She changes how she enters a room. No armor, no blade, the same seat. A midwife who has carried more lives than most generals thinks about the order to leave and understands it on the first breath. She knows a kind of love that withdraws at the sharpest point, so something larger can pass through. Those responses do not care which temple she chose. They do not care whether a clerk wrote her name with one character or two. They care that the shape of her choice fits hands in many trades. Even the men of code find themselves altered. Some stop telling the story to prove that no second Tomoe will be allowed. They start telling it to prove that the code can hold more than they thought. They begin to ask whether honor is a fence or a field. Fields feed more people. You can see this slow turn in small margins across many years. A caption under a print shifts from lady warrior to peerless rider. A footnote that once fretted about impropriety now points out effective tactics. In one copybook, a student has written a clean sentence in the corner. Her loyalty was not smaller because it lived. There is a last tension in this chapter that matters if you make things for a living. Speed fights depth. You want to be first with the tale. You also want to be right. Tomoe's afterlife shows how to split the difference. Lead with the bright deed. Then buy yourself time with a promise of the deeper cut. Keep the promise. The audience will give you the minutes if you give them the meal. So where does that leave us as we step from snow to ink to drum and back again? It leaves us with a woman whose record is clean enough to anchor a story and loose enough to let many step into it. It leaves us with a set of endings that say more about the tellers than the told. It leaves us with a duty when we carry her name forward. Hold the deed tight, hold the ending open, and do not polish away the part where it hurts. One more hook before we go to the next room. Legends are not museums, they are workshops. The tools on the bench are the same ones Tomoe used. Seat, breath, timing, choice. Who picked them up after her and what did they build with them? That is the road ahead. Night held its breath when she left Owazu. The pines closed behind her like a gate. Frost cracked under iron shoes. Tomoe rode the river's edge, staying where the ice was thick and the reeds were taller than a man. She did not look back. Looking back slows the hands. Before dawn, she found a charcoal hut half buried in drifted snow. The door leaned on a single hinge. Inside, the smell of old smoke sat in the wood. She tied her horse to a beam, cut her greave lace with stiff fingers, and cleaned the cut on her thigh with melted snow and coarse cloth. The pain came in waves. She let it pass through and counted each breath until her hand steadied. At sunrise, she moved again. Hills stepped away into pale distance. A fox crossed her path and did not spook. By noon, she had 3 valleys between her and the field. In the second valley, a shrunk-back village watched a stranger pass without question. In the third, a stone shrine stood under a cedar with bark like turtle shell. She dismounted, bowed, and spoke Yoshinaka's name once in the cold air. The sound felt like a promise kept. She took a road that no patrol would choose. It ran along a ridge where winter turns the wind into knives. A storm should have found her there. It didn't. On the 4th night, she slept in the shadow of a fallen tree and woke to a thin singing. A stream ran under the ice faster than it looked. She followed it down to a small temple tucked in a gorge. An old nun met her in the doorway with a broom and clear eyes. The nun looked at Tomoe's hands, at the thick skin where a bowstring bites. She looked at the horse that stood without moving while a stranger pushed snow from its hooves. She nodded once and stepped aside. The temple held the kind of quiet that does not scold. Tomoe did not give her name. The nun did not ask. They ate rice and turnip soup by a small fire. Steam rose from the bowls. After, Tomoe slept on a floor so clean it squeaked under her knee. Winter leaned hard on the mountain. Tomoe stayed. She rose before dawn, split wood, carried water, patched a torn roof, swept a path. She learned the worn prayers by the rhythm of the old nun's breath. She learned the map of the gorge by the way sound changed after snow. When soldiers quartered on the far road, their voices came thin and sharp. She moved the horse into a stand of rhododendron and brushed the tracks with a pine bough. No one looked up the gorge that week. The storm finally came and wiped the slate clean. When the thaw came, 2 village girls began to visit with baskets for kindling. They watched Tomoe in the way young things watch a hawk. They noticed the way she stood, weight in her heels, shoulders loose, hands quiet. One day a strip of willow snapped while they tied a bundle, and the rope slapped a cheek hard enough to make eyes sting. Tomoe stepped over, retied the knot, and showed them where to tuck the end so it would not bite. "Work should not leave marks that do not pay you back," she said. The girls nodded like they had been handed a secret. News drifted up the valley with traders and woodcutters, Yoritomo's riders, Yoshitsune's victories, new orders posted at checkpoints, new taxes for people who had never seen a warhorse, except when a road washed out and it needed hauling. No one in the gorge said the name that sat between all the lines. It hung there anyway, like the smell of rain before the first drop. Summer brought bandits to the lower path. 3 men with pitted blades began to take rice from baskets and fear from faces. The village headman climbed to the temple and spoke in the shadow of the cedar. His voice shook, not from the climb. The old nun listened and then turned to Tomoe without looking surprised. "Can you change this?" she asked. Tomoe said yes. They watched the lower path for a week. At dusk, fog pooled in the dip where stones narrowed the road. She chose that place. She told the headman to bring boys with loud feet and women with louder voices. They took up pots and wooden mallets and stood behind rocks. When the 3 men came for easy rice, sound hit them from both sides, wild and sudden. Tomoe stepped into the path, horse steady, bow low. She did not have to draw. She only had to speak the way cold water speaks when it meets fire. The first man ran. The second stayed too long and saw the way her hands rested on the string. He left a blade in the mud. The third tried to smile and found he couldn't. They did not come back. Word of that quiet fight went no farther than the next valley. That was enough. The work of living rarely needs a drum. In the second winter, she cut a new bow from a stave of mountain yew. The old nun watched from the doorway again and said nothing until the last shaving fell. Then she said a thing that sounds simple until you need it. A tool holds the hand that shaped it. Keep yours clean. Tomoe took the bow down into the field below the temple and began to draw and loose in sets. 10 arrows to settle breath, 10 to test distance, 10 to test wind. The girls counted without being asked. When she missed where she meant to. That pleased her more than the center shot. When they begged to learn, she handed them a light bow and showed them how to stand. Hips under shoulders, line from heel to crown. Eyes soft. Let the string do the work. They laughed when the first arrows wobbled. They did not laugh when their hands blistered. By spring, the wobble was gone. Years moved like water under ice, quiet and fast. Tomoe kept the temple's roof tight, and the path swept, and the winter stores dry. In harvest time, she took a pack and walked south for 3 days to a place where a head was said to lie under stone. Gichuji. A priest there spoke Yoshinaka's name with the care of a man handling a bright blade. Tomoe left an offering that cost her more than food. Then she went back to the gorge and did not return. A rumor reached her one autumn with the persimmon carts. It said a lord with a hard smile and quick hands wanted her found and pressed into marriage. Another said the same lord had died in a fall he deserved. Rumors were faces given by the teller. Tomoe stacked both with the turnip greens and burned them when they spoiled. When the old nun's hands began to shake, Tomoe took on the finer work. Needle, ink, little repairs that require still breath. On the last day of the nun's life, the sky was clear enough to show the ridges sharp. Tomoe sat and held the old woman's wrist while the pulse slowed. The nun opened her eyes once and looked very young. She said one word, "Live." Then she went where all good breath goes. The temple did not feel empty after, it felt wider. That winter, a new abbot came through the gorge on his way to collect rice from houses that had nothing left to give. He counted heads. He looked long at Tomoe's cropped hair, at the bow on the wall, at the horse that stood with both ears on him. He tried to name her from the scrolls in his head and failed. It made him angry. He told her to hand over the bow. She said no. He left with less rice than he came for, and a story he could not make neat. That is how some orders end. When spring settled, the girls from the village brought their own daughters up the path. Tomoe did not make a school. She made a habit, a loose circle before breakfast, breath in a line, hands that do not fight the string, eyes that learn to see a thing and its shadow at the same time. The girls learned faster than the boys. They always do when given the same time and ground. One summer, a patrol followed a trapper into the gorge and found the temple door open and no one inside. The patrol leader stood in the yard and frowned at the neat paths and the swept step and the arrow target with 1,000 small scars. He pulled an arrow from the post and watched how the reed was spliced. Care done by a hand that loves the work. He left it where he found it. He told the men to go. Some men know when not to step on a story. Tomoe grew older the way steel does. The shine dulled, the edge deepened. She kept the bow oiled, the saddle clean, and the names of the lost polished in her mouth so they would not slip. On evenings when the light turned the gorge to copper, she would walk down to the stream and stand on the rock, where she had first heard its under-ice song. She would say Yoshinaka once and Kanehira once. Then she would say nothing for a long time. The last time she drew the bow in the lower field, a storm was building over the far ridge. Wind stroked the grass in one direction, then the other. The first arrow took the center, the second split the first. The third struck high and to the right. She laughed, shook out her hand, and nodded to the girl beside her to take the line. The girl did, and set her feet the way she had been shown. Her arrow wobbled. Her second flew straight. Her third landed where she meant it. She lowered the bow and smiled like the weather had cleared. Tomoe looked at that smile and felt the shape of an old command answer itself. Live. Do not be taken. She had obeyed, not by hiding, by building a piece of ground where fear had no purchase, by leaving strong hands in a valley that would need them, by keeping the blade for work that paid and putting it down when it did not. No clerk wrote that in a margin. No drum carried it to the next town. But the valley held it the way winter holds water, quiet and sure. One day a traveler passed the temple and saw a woman saddling an old horse with a scar across its flank. He bowed because the space around her asked for it. She bowed back without words. He went on his way feeling taller and could not say why. By then the snow at Owazu was long melted. The ground is still remembered. So did the people who learned to breathe, to stand, to choose. The story could end there. It won't. Because stories worth keeping ask to be used. The next part is how. A different winter. Fluorescent light instead of snow glow. A small studio on the edge of a busy city. Our tired creator leans over a desk. A timeline open on a screen. Audio spikes like mountains. Clips stacked like fallen logs. The clock says midnight. Rent is due in 10 days. A pitch sits in drafts. The last upload held for 5 minutes, then drifted. Watchers clicked away at the 3-minute mark. The room smells like coffee and warm plastic. Tomoe's story sits on the outline, quiet and sharp. It is not a museum piece. It is a tool. Here is how to use it. First, seat. Decide what you are and where you stand. Pick one lane for this piece and sit deep in it. If it is a documentary, write like breath, not like a report. If it is a founder story, make the stakes clear in one clean sentence within the first 20 seconds. The viewer should feel your weight. They should know you will not tip when comment whines blow. Second, breath. Pace is not speed, it is control. Shape the first minute like a steady draw, not a grab. A cold open with one vivid image, a line that hooks by asking a real question. Then give immediate value so people feel they are in steady hands. Every 4 or 5 minutes place a small cliff on the path, not a shout. A door half open, a lost letter, a last order. Viewers will walk through if you show them why. Third, timing. Set the beats before you cut. Your story needs anchors at regular marks the way a field needs stones to break the wind. At minute 3, a rehook that reframes the question bigger than they thought. At minute 9, a turn that forces a choice. At minute 14, a clean reveal that pays for their time. Use music and silence with the same care Tomoe used noise and quiet. Silence is a blade when placed right. Fourth, choice. Every scene either advances the line or clouds it. Cut anything that repeats what we already feel. Keep anything that adds texture we can carry. If you must choose between a clever line and a clear one, choose clear. If you must choose between showing your research and keeping us moving, choose movement and tuck the research into one crisp image or a line that lands. Now put it to work on screen. Open with winter light on a white field. A single rider leans forward. A bowstring hums. Cut to the modern studio. The same hum in a laptop fan. The same lean in a tired back. The narrator says a simple line. A woman rode into a storm and made minutes for other people to live in. You are about to do the same with a story. Flow into the first body with essential context, fast and clean. 2 clans, 1 war. 1 lord who reached too far. 1 rider who did not tip when the ground moved. Give names, give stakes, then move. At the 2 to 3 minute mark, rehook. You thought this was only about a duel. It is about a choice that most of us face in quiet rooms with no drums. Stay with me. I will show you the moment and the cost. Deepen in the second body. Kyoto's unease, the retreat, the cold that cracks lips. Bandits on a lower path years later, and the way she solved it without blood. Parallel the modern cut. The creator faces a different lower path. A broken upload. A client who wants shallow. A deadline that says hurry. Show the same anchors landing in a new room. Seat, breath, timing, choice. Expand in the third body. Give the battle its full sound. Give the last order its full hurt. Then follow her through the gorge to the temple where work replaces noise. Let the viewer feel how legacy is built when nobody is watching. In the studio, cut to the creator placing hooks at the right minutes, trimming voiceover so lines land, swapping one flashy transition for a cleaner cut that carries meaning further. No lecture, just a demonstration. You do not have to say the word discipline. It will be in the frame. In the outro, payoff. Recap the shape without reciting it. A rider who steadied men in a storm, obeyed when it mattered most, and built a quiet valley that did not need rescue. A maker who steadied viewers minute by minute, made clean choices at the hard points, and turned a rough draft into something that holds. End with a call to action that respects the audience. Don't ask for a like. Ask them to use what they just felt. Say it plain. In your next piece, pick one anchor to fix. Maybe it is how you open. Maybe it is the hook at minute 4. Maybe it is the choice to cut a scene you love because it repeats. Fix that one thing, then ride again. Close on 2 images that rhyme. In the gorge, a girl releases an arrow and hits where she means to. In the studio, the progress bar reaches the end and the upload holds. The room is still, the work is clean, the blade remembers. Fade on a last small truth. Legends are not there to make us feel small. They are there to make our minutes bigger. Tomoe made minutes on a winter field. You can make them here. Breathe. Place the hand. Choose. Ride.